downtown Decatur. It's the Faber Files. Hello, I'm your host, Bill Faber. Because democracy demands debate, we present this program, a program of public issues and interests concerning the local community. Tonight's feature is part one of a two-part presentation, of a historical presentation regarding the mining wars in West Virginia at the turn of the century. Our presenter is Sarah Lynch Thomason, who is from Tennessee, and she's going to be presenting a series of images, still images taken from historical archives, along with local and historical ballads from Appalachia, showing the struggle of workers as they fought for dignity, wages, and for their family. Join us in this presentation of History Come Alive. Join us here at Millikan University this evening for part one of Blair Mountain Pathways.
My name is Sarah Lynch Thomason. I'm the producer of a music CD project called Blair Pathways. And Blair Pathways tells the story of the West Virginia coal mine wars through historic music covered by contemporary artists. So over the past 2 years, I've engaged with musicians, including Dawn Flemons of the Carolina Chocolate Drops, Elizabeth Laprelle, a really wonderful ballad singer from Virginia, Riley Boggess, nationally acclaimed banjo player, and many, many others to take the old songs of Appalachia's labor movements and give them a new sound so that contemporary audiences could understand these extraordinary labor wars through music. I've been traveling doing this presentation because I care a lot about what is happening right now to Appalachia, to the land and to the people and to the cultural memory of the region. And it's because for about 130 years, the Appalachian region has been used as a colony to produce and export precious resources to the rest of the nation and really the world. And this very much leads to the destruction of the possibility of healthy communities and land in the central Appalachian states. And this includes Kentucky, Virginia, West Virginia, Tennessee, Pennsylvania, and some others. I'm particularly concerned about the fate of one mountain called Blair Mountain in West Virginia. It's currently under threat of being destroyed for mountaintop removal mining. The disappearance of this mountain not only means the disappearance of an important part of our ecosystem there in West Virginia, but it also means the erasure of a very important and powerful story in our labor history and our history as working Americans. So this evening, through words, song, and image, I'm hoping to explore that history of Blair Mountain and the West Virginia mine wars, and I hope that you might come to care about the story as much as I do. The photos you will see come from a variety of sources. Many are from the West Virginia and Regional History Collection. Others are from the West Virginia State Archives. And the music you're going to hear in the next hour comes from historic poems and songs from the Appalachian Labor Wars and American Union struggles from around the same time period in the early 20th century. And almost all the songs you'll hear me performing tonight, you can hear performed by varied artists on the Blair Pathway CD, which we have here for sale. So once again, thank you for being here, and with that, I will begin. We have joined United Mine Workers and have come out on strike. We're demanding higher wages, shorter hours, and human rights. And until we get our just demands, we'll strike with all our might. For every working man must have his freedom. The union, the UNWA, down with the tyrants, we're in this fight to stay. For we're running from the flag, and we'll win the fight someday. For every working man must have his freedom. In the hot days of late August 1921, thousands of people were making their way across the mountains of southern West Virginia. The men were armed with rifles, shotguns, and pistols, while the women dressed in nurses' uniforms, prepared to care for the sick and wounded. The majority of these people were from coal mining families, but as one observer recalled, it wasn't just miners. There were men from every walk of life. Doctors, lawyers, people that run drugstores, and got up out of there and took to the hills with high-powered guns. If you were to ask these many thousands of people why they were marching, you would receive many answers. We want justice for those in prison for being union. We're going to kill Don Chafin, that anti-union tyrant of Logan County. We're tired of the state being owned by the coal companies. As the marchers advanced across the steep, rugged terrain, they hijacked trains, took over the clubhouses of mine owners, liberated weaponry from stores, and stopped to be fed by allies and friends. Forming a loose army, they identified each other by wearing red bandanas and keeping passwords. They progressed on through the mountains, exhilarated at the prospect of exerting their full force on the coal barons of southern West Virginia. Wait, the miner has found his might. The Union boys have put the foe to flight. All loyal men are marching on each day. To victory they will crown our way. While now our children in white tents lay, yet we are near victory day by day. For we will win, the end is almost here. Freedom for Tug River's men is near. The largest insurrection since the Civil War was at hand. The rebels were Italian, African American, Hungarian, Polish, white. They were Unionists, Socialists, Republicans, and Democrats. This was no spontaneous event. This march was 20 years in the making. Since 1902, the coal mining communities of southern West Virginia had been asking for basic protections and civil rights from their employers, only to be refused and threatened. For the better part of our nation's history, the story of coal has been deeply interlaced with the struggles of working people. Some of the earliest coal mining in West Virginia took place in the Kanawha Valley, where the saltworks industry used coal mined by slaves to power its factories. After the Civil War and a slow recovery, southern Appalachia's coal industry began to rapidly grow. Northern corporate interests, led by industry giants such as John D. Rockefeller and J.P. Morgan, bought up all the land they could, regardless of whether it was already occupied. From Chicago, Baltimore, New York, and Philadelphia, corporate agents traversed the mountains looking for farmers and small landowners. They offered contracts and quick cash, convincing residents across the region to sell away their land for the mineral deposits underneath. When they couldn't convince the owners to sell, the companies went to the courts, claiming to have old land patents that gave them the right to the settlers' land. A West Virginia paper reflected angrily in 1890, "Since our lands have become invaluable, the slumbering pocket patentees have become awakened, and some of them are now taking steps to take from the people of this country lands purchased by them upon mere technicalities." By the end of this rapid buying period, 94% of Appalachia's mineral resources were owned by foreign corporate interests. With this accomplished, these new landowners moved forward in building the railroads. Many of the railroad laborers were black migrants from the Deep South. They sang songs to keep in time with the heavy, precise labor of laying tracks. Well, lovers is your right. Oh, yes, we right. Newborn baby born last night. Walking, talking for day and night. Carry it to the mountain, boys. Carry it to the mountain. Many of these migrants stayed in the region to become coal miners, in some fields forming the majority of the mining population. By the 1890s, a host of rail lines, including the Chesapeake and Ohio, the Kanawha and Ohio, and the coal and coke companies were crisscrossing the state. West Virginia had become a vast network of rail lines, tunnels, and bridges. By the early 1900s, the state was second only to Pennsylvania in coal production, and nearly 100,000 men were working southern West Virginia's mines alone. Though miners were expected to meet a quota, in many places they worked at their own pace without heavy supervision. Writer Carter Goodrich observed, "The factory hand works under the boss's eye. His hours are rigidly bounded by the whistle and time clock, but the isolated miner sets his own pace and comes and goes pretty much at his own time." This structure allowed miners of different ethnic backgrounds to work alongside one another, and it gave their jobs a sense of dignity that clashed with many other elements of their day-to-day lives. Many of the company owners of West Virginia treated mining families as disposable capital. Conditions in the mines were harsh and dangerous, with little to no state regulation. Preventable mine accidents occurred often. Between 1910 and 1920 alone, 4,260 miners died from unsafe conditions and mine accidents. On the job, miners often faced discriminatory pay practices, such as docking and cribbing, designed to pay the miner less for the coal that he had mined. Furthermore, the money miners did receive was often paid in company scrip, not American cash dollars. Scrip was only redeemable at institutions like the company store, which often charged inflated prices for goods. Most mining families lived in company-owned housing, and their rent was taken out of their paychecks. Historian David Allen Corbin observes, numerically and proportionally, more miners in West Virginia lived in company towns than in any other state. Despite the fact that coal operators were running most elements of mining community life, many bosses were hardly interested in providing healthy or enjoyable living environments. One wrote to his superintendent, "We are not running a Sunday school. Never lose sight of the fact that the sole purpose of this organization is to make money for the stockholders, and matters of conduct that tend to produce a contradictory result should be promptly squelched with a heavy hand." Beyond all these conditions was yet one more oppressive element, the mine guards. These men acted as private police and could roam work camps and towns alike, spying on and intimidating workers who spoke out about poor conditions. The result of all this was a kind of economic slavery. One elderly miner recalled, "You didn't even own your own soul in those damnable places. The company owned everything. The houses, the schools, the churches, the stores, everything." But across the country, a union movement was growing. Encouraged by waves of new political philosophies, from socialism to populism, workers banded together to form protective organizations that would challenge the power of abusive employers. "It is evident," declared one miners' union charter, "that some steps should be taken to check the evils that are fast accruing from insane competition, the heavy foot of which always rests upon the wage of the producer." In 1890, the Knights of Labor and the National Progressive Union of Miners and Mine Laborers converged to form the United Mine Workers of America. Though much of the Midwest was quick to unionize under the UMWA, the task of bringing the Union to West Virginia was a risky and slow one. After a few campaigns, miners of the New Riverfield struck in June of 1902. But in the late fall of that year, after several battles and many arrests, the strike was given up. However, a few mines on Paint and Cabin Creek in Kanawha County did agree to union contracts, and many miners migrated to those creeks just to work in union mines. In 1912, miners in the central competitive coal fields of Pennsylvania, Indiana, Ohio, and Iowa met in a joint conference with their operators. During the meeting, the miners were able to negotiate and win what was called the Cleveland Advance, a 5% increase in pay per ton of coal mined. Inspired by the gains made by the Midwestern miners, Paint Creek miners down in West Virginia asked for a joint conference with their bosses. When they met in early April, they told the operators that they wanted a 5% increase as well. After much negotiation, the operators refused, and as a result, thousands of Paint Creek miners walked out on strike on April 18th. "We are locked in deadly combat with the honest workman's foe. We are fighting out the question, does the union stand or go? With some to fight and some to work and furnish all the dough, we are sure to rout the foe." To the west of Paint Creek, on Cabin Creek, mining families were ready to join the fight. Most had lost their union contracts in 1904. So in August of 1912, they pledged solidarity with the Cabin Creek strikers. Amongst their demands were listed abolition of the mine guard system, letting the coal miners elect their own check weighman so as not to be cheated when their cars were weighed for slate, the freedom to trade and buy goods wherever the miners pleased, and payment in cash, not scrip. Improved sanitary conditions, and the 9-hour day. Of 10 demands total, the 5% increase was the last listed. It was clear that what the mining communities wanted most, even before an increase in pay, was to gain dignified treatment. By the fall of 1912, over 7,500 non-union miners from Cabin Creek, Kanawha, and Fayette counties quit work, left company housing, and with the assistance of the UMWA were living in strike camps. The strike was on. In the wake of the 1902 New Riverfield strikes, the mine owners had focused new energy on importing foreign workers, theorizing that immigrants would be more economically vulnerable and less likely to organize. The mine owners' efforts brought Italians, Hungarians, and other Eastern Europeans to the fields, so that by the mid-19-teens, almost half of West Virginia's miners were recent immigrants. What the employers didn't realize was that many of the men and women they were importing, especially the Italians, were freshly influenced by anarchist and collectivist politics, philosophies which were gaining popularity in Southern and Eastern Europe. During the Paint Creek and Cabin Creek strikes, as well as others, Italian workers often proved to be the first to walk out and the last to leave the picket line. They sang anthems that spoke to their own sense of autonomy and strength. O profughi d'Italia, all'avventura, si va senza rimpianti, né paura, nostra patria, il mondo intero, nostra legge è la libertà, ed un pensiero, nostra patria, il mondo intero, nostra legge è la libertà, ed un pensiero, the living forgista. Life in the tent colonies was hard, but communities provided for themselves by cooking, foraging, gardening, and hunting. They took time to entertain each other with songs, dances, and games. Union organizer Ralph Chaplin observed, "The fact that many of the strikers seem to rather enjoy the situation makes some of the local respectables furious with rage. It isn't just what one would expect of a striker to see him holding his head high and walking around as if he owned the whole valley." Present among the workers was union organizer and orator Mother Jones. Over 70 years old, Jones was notorious for her fiery language and indomitable personality. During a 1900 organizing campaign, Jones had seen the terrible conditions faced by West Virginia mining communities and had declared, "My brothers, I shall consider it an honor if when you write my epitaph upon my tombstone you say, 'Died fighting their battles in West Virginia.'" Jones moved from coal camp to coal camp, motivating hundreds of men and women to join the Union effort. William Baumgartner, who had boarded Jones at her home during the Paint Creek strikes, recalled years later, "She just never cared for nothing. You couldn't scare her. Why, one time when I told her she oughtn't to go someplace because it was too dangerous, she said the miners were being treated dirty and she was going to help them. Then she laughed and said, 'You only die once.'" All hail Mother Jones. The themes of your speeches are grander and richer than silver and gold. The light of the mansions eternal, where wisdom and love will unfold. The smiling of faces that greet you are heaven in labor to rest. God bless you, dear soul, is our feeling for visiting us, God, tonight. Jones was aware of the terrorizing tactics of the mine guards and spies, whom the coal companies had imported to help break the strike. The men from the Baldwin Felts Agency of Bluefield, West Virginia, were the worst of all. The Baldwin spies, who had been used against the miners in the 1902 strike, were known for their cruelty. They evicted union miners from company housing, harassed and beat strikers, and acted as spies amongst the union rank and file. The coal companies also quickly imported replacement workers, called scabs, to take over the striking miners' jobs. Replacement workers often didn't know strike was even on until they got to the coal fields. And once there, it was hard to leave. William Gilks, who was hired as a replacement worker, told his story. I was hired in New York as a stronghand man. I was told that there was no labor trouble and that I could make $36 a day. When I got on the train, they would not let me get off, and I found myself surrounded by armed guards. When I arrived here, I found myself in a position where there was a strike. The guards warned me to stay in the house, saying that I would be out of danger. They also warned me to keep away from the union, that they would harm me, that one of our men had been shot. Well, I made my escape out the back window and climbed the mountains to the union. Many times during the strikes, the mining community appealed to Governor William Glasscock to address the wrongs committed on them by the companies. Glasscock attempted arbitration a few times, but in every case, the coal operators refused to recognize the legitimacy of the UMWA as a bargaining agent. Instead, the coal operators demanded of Glasscock that he send in militia to quell the violence. In September of 1912, Glasscock invoked his right as governor to declare a state of war and sent in 1,200 state troopers. Rifles, pistols, machine guns, and more were confiscated from both coal company guards and strikers. But it soon became clear that the militia was present first and foremost to protect the interests of the mine owners. Military courts were set up in the strike zone, and strikers were tried en masse, with some sentenced to as many as 7 years in prison. Later, a member of the military courts would admit under oath that in pronouncing their judgments, the courts were not controlled by any law, human or divine. Within the grasp of unjust courts, behind the bars of jail, our working men on false reports as cowards never fail to fill the jurors' ears with lies, the safeguard of the slave, whose lies will fall as truth will rise to vindicate the brave. Our noblest men have oft been called to fill the felon cells. In tyrants' jails securely walled, our greatest martyrs fell. But progress marches steadily, truth will open up the door, and justice in the misery that binds and grinds the poor. During the 3 martial law periods that ensued, citizens and strikers were prevented from gathering in groups and moving about freely. Mother Jones was arrested for inciting a riot because she read the Declaration of Independence out loud to miners at the town of Eskdale. The tragedy is, she would later say, the young boys who arrested me had no knowledge of that immortal document, nor a conception of its meaning. Even with the military courts, mine guards, and state and county militia harassing them, the strikers kept up a constant variety of tactical sabotage. Rail lines were destroyed, coal tipple blown up, and the homes of company officials were set on fire. Sarah Blizzard, a striker at the time, recalled years later, "Yes, sir, this armored train used by the mine guards would parade up and down and shoot the woods where the miners were. So me and 3 other women, one night, we decided to put an end to that. We slipped out after dark and took crowbars, pried up the rails, and rolled them down the hillside. The next morning, when that old train came along, it didn't go to Leewood like it was supposed to. The men that were inside cussed and fumed, and we stood on the side laughing at them." As the severity of the violence increased on both sides, Baldwin Felt's agents became special targets for the strikers' wrath. Agent Falk narrowly escaped one attack that left another agent dead. He said later, "I have been through a dozen or more strikes, and that was the meanest class of people I've ever had to contend with. The most desperate men I've had to contend with in any strike." The strike period stretched on into the winter of 1913. It was harsh living in the tent colonies, and with snow and freezing temperatures, many suffered from pneumonia. The sparse foliage left the miners' homes exposed to attack, and everyone eagerly awaited the advantage of better cover from which to take vengeance on the coal operators for such cruel conditions. The hills very barren, cold and lonely. I wonder what the few months will bring. Our strike is on, our strength would win if only. Oh, the Civil War continued. In February of 1913, an attack on strikers at the tent colony of Holly Grove left one striker dead, prompting one final period of martial law. Less than a month later, on March 4th, Governor Henry D. Hatfield was inaugurated into office. A doctor, Hatfield spent the first few days of his post visiting the strike zone and tending to sick and wounded strikers. After talks with both sides, Hatfield concluded that it was past time for the state to step in and do what Glasscock had refused to do, arbitrate the terms of an agreement. In the summer of 1913, Hatfield created a series of resolutions and forced both sides to accept. The miners of Paint Creek, Cabin Creek, and the New River Fields got their 5% increase, recognition of the Union, and an end for a short time to the mine guard system. But after so much bloodshed, the accessions hardly felt like a victory. UMWA official Bill Blizzard said, "At least 50 men died violent deaths in those desolate gorges, while the death toll of women and children from malnutrition was appalling." Good God, must I now meekly bend my head and cringe back to the gloom I know so well? Forget the wrongs my tongue can never tell. Forget the pleas they silenced with their lead. Forget the hillside strewn with murdered dead, where once they drove me, mocked me when I fell, all black and bloody by their holes of hell, while all my loved ones wept uncomforted.
Come sing, fellow working men, my story I'll relate. How workers in the coal mines fare in Pennsylvania state. Come hear a sad survivor from beside children's graves, and learn how free Americans are treated now as slaves. They robbed us for our pay, they starved us day by day, and they shot us down on the hillside brown and swore our lives away. Years we toiled on patiently, they cut our wages down. We struck and sent the Pinkertons to drive us from that town. We held a meeting near the mine, some hasty words were said. A volley from the Pinkertons laid half a dozen dead. They robbed us for